Hello everyone, it's Invalid, and welcome to the review of Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix. I'm just going to be straight up with you. I've recorded a review of this probably 3 or 4 times now, and every single time I feel like I'm leaving something out. Because I'm trying to be more comprehensive with my review. But the fact is, this game just had so much stuff in it. So I don't even know what I should cover or anything like that, but as it stands, this is going to be a really long review, as you can probably already tell just by looking at the time stamps there. And I'm definitely not going to be covering everything because there's just so much to cover. This game had a lot more work put into it than I think any of the previous installments, with the possible exception of the second game. For PC anyway. I'm just talking about PC whenever I'm referring to the first 3 games. It definitely had more work put into it than the 4th game did. Definitely more than the 3rd game. Definitely more than the 1st game. It's like, this game had so much stuff that it's hard to cover everything. And I say stuff, not content, because for good reason. Because there is so much to do in this game, but a lot of it is kind of repetitive in a way. I think that's the main thing. So let me just start off by saying that this game, start off 2 minutes into the recording, let me just start off by saying that this is a solid game. That this is a solid game. This is a decent game. As far as where it falls under Harry Potter game rankings, it would probably fall between the 3rd and it's somewhere around the 3rd game. As most of you know, my opinion of the 3rd game has risen in recent years from being an absolute shit show to being a decent Harry Potter game, even though it's not nearly as good in my opinion as the 1st or the 2nd game were. Way better. This game is way better than that heaping pile of trash that the 4th game was. And it shows. You know, it shows from the work that they put into this. The developers had a much better idea of what they wanted to do with this game, and they had a much more focused development. They had a much more focused workflow and everything like that. So the game is not, it doesn't feel like it's bouncing all over the place nearly as much as the 4th game did. That being said, I still don't think it's a great Harry Potter game because there's so much extraneous material in it. So, starting off with the good. The soundtrack in this game is excellent. It includes a lot of the stuff by Jeremy Soule, so it's on par easily with all the other installments in this series. And James Hannigan did an awesome job remixing some of the older tracks, as well as putting his own spin on it, and adding new tracks to the game, which apparently, according to Wikipedia, made it better than the movie soundtrack, which is why you can't get it anywhere on a physical CD or anything like that. So that speaks for itself. Really good music. The audio design in general for this game is top-notch. There were multiple parts in this game where I was just sitting listening to the ambience. It was so enjoyable. It was so good for me to listen to. Like the Owlery, the entrance to the Forbidden Forest. So many locations where I just sat and listened to the game. And not just to the music, to the sound ambience that they had. the owls hooting, the forest sounds, all of that stuff. It was... I could play this game with my eyes closed and just sit there and enjoy the soundtrack and what I was hearing through my headphones or through my speakers. Really good sound design in this one. And that goes for the voice actors as well. I mean, this is probably some of the best voice acting that I've heard in any of the Harry Potter games. And that's not saying a whole lot, considering, number one, that this is the second game where they included the actual cast, or some of the actual cast members from the Harry Potter movies. So we have that in here as well. And a lot more of the actors and actresses that are participating in this, and putting much more emphasis on the fact that it's like the movie. But also the fact that this game had a focused direction. So there was actual narration going on. There's actual emphasis being put onto certain scenes where there's emotional telling. It's not just cutscene and then explore some random part of the Hogwarts grounds. It's nothing like that. You have the Hogwarts grounds from the movies. Like they took the Hogwarts grounds from the movies and recreated it in game. They took the faces, the people, the actors and actresses, and did scans of them and put their models, the 3D models made from those scans, in game. So they weren't just trying to get a quick cash grab. Okay, yes, they were trying to get cash from it, but they weren't just trying to get a cash grab from it. They were putting effort into this game, and it shows from how striking the resemblance is from the movies to the game. Like it's as if you're walking around the set. And I'm not just saying it because the actors and actresses were saying it. I'm saying it because I've seen some of the movies now, and I know just how close the developers made the level appear in relation to the movie. It's really, really well thought out and put together. Now, with that being said, there's still a lot of the game where it feels kind of weird as far as level design is concerned, partly from the climbing and some of the pseudo-platforming that you have going on, which just, I don't know. Some of it is nostalgia talking, where I miss the platforming from the original games, where they had you jumping over pits and whatnot. And just kind of the bizarreness of it. I feel like this game took a step in the right direction when it comes to exploring and the weirdness of it. But ultimately, I feel like it still missed a lot of the charm that the original games had, the first and the second game. Number one is the color palette. The color tones are way more varied than in the fourth game. It's a beautiful game, especially if you find certain locations, like the outdoors it's pretty and all, but when you get the swamps in there, the greens and all that stuff, the Gryffindor common room, the dungeon where the Slytherins and Potions classroom takes place. The color contrast and palettes are so different in each of those locations that it's really quite nice, honestly. And unfortunately, it's kind of overshadowed by the fact that 70% of the game you spend inside the Hogwarts castle proper, where it's all yellowish brick stone. So you kind of miss out on the colors that the game has. That being said, after a while it's still more detailed, and it loses some of the contrast and the saturation that the original games had. And that simplicity really lent those original games a charm that just still is missing from this game. As well as the exploration bit, which, as many of you know, is a big focus for me in the Harry Potter games. The exploration bit felt less intriguing and more redundant. Not necessarily because it was doing the exact same thing over and over, but because there was too much. There was one commenter who put it very well, where this is like a simulation of Harry Potter cleans the castle, you know? A lot of what you're doing is throwing rugs or lighting torches or sconces and so on and so forth. You're not actually discovering things in Hogwarts. And that's not to say that there weren't things to discover in Hogwarts. There was a lot to discover in this game. But unfortunately, it felt like it was more nods to previous games or previous periods in time, and not little nuggets of your own discovery, you know? Where you found this special corridor that you wouldn't even have found by asking the portraits about their passwords and fulfilling whatever tasks you had for them, right? It was all little things. And I think part of the reason that they didn't have near the impact they did is, number one, a lot of the things that you could discover, quote unquote, were easier to find, and there were a lot of things to discover. And some of the things you discovered were basically the same. I said before, way earlier on, that this game has a lot of the same things going on. It has a lot of repetition. It has a lot of redundancy. And I think that's really its big downfall, is the fact that it's so much of the same thing. You have so many chores, you're doing so much of the same thing over and over, where it's like casting different spells on the knights and having them go into their silly poses that I absolutely loved. Accessing all the portraits. This, that, and the other thing. And all the various things that you can find, where you're doing the same thing over and over again. And it's just putting a slight twist on it to make it different. And this bled over into pretty much every other aspect of the game as well, where, I mean, even the tasks we had, like rounding up everybody for the Dumbledore's army. We had a lot of variation in those missions. I mean, we had one, I don't remember if it was Dennis or somebody else, but having to do 3 separate things just to get that little shit to join us in the room of requirement. And then finding out that pretty much everybody else was fairly simple. All we had to do was find them and talk to them, and then finding somebody else and talking to them, and then suddenly they were both in room of requirements. Or unlocking a certain portrait. Or something else. You know, fairly simple tasks, and then there's just that one idiot who decides, oh, my homework's more important even though I signed up for this. A lot of it felt samey after a while. Like I don't know, it felt gimmicky, and it felt like I was doing the same thing over and over again. Now, I'm not knocking this game for that in particular, because there was a lot of that in prior games, where you're doing the same thing over and over again, but somehow it felt more fun in those games because of the fact that there was an intrinsic reward rather than an extrinsic reward. And I feel like, ironically, as amazing as the Room of Rewards was, because of the fact that you gained this currency, so to speak, which showed up in the form of points, that unlocked various things for you in the Room of Rewards, in some way I felt like it took some of the joy out of it. Having this pop-up saying that I'm getting points, and then going to some room and in a way being spent for me. So I'm not choosing what I unlock, I'm just trying to unlock everything because I know I get points and I unlock it. And it takes away some of the mystery. It takes away some of the magic of going around and discovering things for yourself. And that being said, I'm really thankful that they put in a discovery feature where you press a button and you have that discovery, you have it what floor you're on or what area you're in, and then it has how much of you discovered in percentage. That was quite nice, except that if they hadn't filled it so much with stuff, that wouldn't be necessary in the first place. It's a little bit like, I've been recently playing Shadow of the Colossus, the remake for PlayStation 4. And they do a remarkable job of just having all these different things that you can do and collect, but they tell you nothing about any of it. It's all up for your discovery beyond what the colossi are. You know, if you find any fruit, that's because you found it. You stumbled upon what you could find, and then you knew what to look for. And it became more of an intrinsic reward than an extrinsic one, because it becomes, look at what I can do, look what I found, versus doing this so I can get something else. And maybe that's just how I look at it, but I don't know. My perspective has very much changed since I last played the first 3 games, so I'm sure things have... I might have a completely different view on it, even through the rose-tinted nostalgia goggles. But... but I've always been more interested in the qualitative aspects of games, where it's the storytelling, it's the discovery, the intrinsic, the ethereal, you know, the qualities that you really can't put values to, even though you technically can, because you got color values for numbers and data points for models and animations and whatever. But but for the player, it feels much more rewarding on a curiosity level, on a soulful level. It's feeding something creative. It brings more questions to the front. Good questions like what more is there? Versus what I felt like this game did, which is make it a collectathon, where you're trying to get everything to get the 100% so you can unlock something in the Room of Rewards, versus doing it so that you can find everything, so that you have that feeling of, wow, is there even more than this, or have I found everything? And it's... yeah, it's hard. For me, anyway. Just to look at this game and still have that same feeling that I did in the first couple games. This game came a lot closer, though. And all things said and done, it's still a decent game. It still kept me hooked for well past the time where we completed the story. I mean, how many hours, how many parts are there? There's four bonus parts, and then the footage that I smushed into that fourth bonus video because of the fact, or the third bonus video rather, because of the fact that it was a 6-hour-long recording session. Legit 6 hours. You got to see about 3 of it because of the fact that some of it was going around completing stuff off camera, well, finger quotes off camera, and other parts of it was just, you know, me rambling on and getting lost in the in the school, in the Hogwarts castle. And there were a lot of good things about this game, you know, that kept me engaged. I think my biggest thing about, my favorite love-hate thing about this game, that's such a weird phrase, my favorite love-hate thing about this game was the way that you casted spells. In every other game up to this point, it has been a single button that casts your spell. In the fourth game, you had 2 buttons that cast spells, and then your Axial button. I'm not counting the Extremos, the Magicos Extremos, because that was just a boost to all your other magical things. But in this game, you actually made gestures to cast your spell. You were actively engaged in whatever spell you were going to cast. And I love the theory of that. I love the concept of it. And with every different control screen, whether you were using keyboard, whether you were using keyboard and mouse, whether you were using controller, I can't talk straight for some reason, but I'll live with it. It was, in a way, really satisfying to choose which spell I'm casting solely by making my own gestures for whatever spell I want to cast. And if I goof the gesture, then either I cast the wrong spell or it whiffs. If I cast a spell that I want and it doesn't work on something, then that'll whiff. But it's experimenting with all the different spells. In practice, it kind of sucks. Not gonna lie. The controls in general felt a little clunky. And I say this having played most of the game on mouse and keyboard. On controller, I did play a little bit on controller, for those of you who remember. On controller, it felt a lot smoother in general, except for the spell casting. And the main reason for spell casting, the gestures itself was much smoother, but it took a lot longer to cast consecutive spells for something like Devil Snare or if I was dueling. And plus, I'm just more comfortable on mouse and keyboard. That's what I grew up on. It's still what I play the majority of my games with to this day. So that's what I'm comfortable with, even if it's a janky control scheme. You know, I've played with far worse. Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone had really shitty controls, but I played through it. When I did my Let's Play of Doom 95, it was mouse, it was all keyboard, you know? I managed. It's all what you're used to, you know? It's entirely what you're used to. But with mouse and keyboard, I really felt the effects of this being a console port. Number one, because I still cannot figure out to this day what determines the direction that Harry's going in. If it's determined by camera, or if it's determined by the direction he's standing in, by the direction he's facing. Because I would be moving, I would stand still and I'd press W to go forward. And I would think it would go in relation to the camera, but he just goes off in some random ass direction that doesn't correspond with either one of those. You know, it was just bizarre. And with the mouse, with the gestures, oftentimes it felt like I would make the correct gesture and I'd watch myself doing the correct gesture, at least what I felt like, and it wouldn't seem to register correctly in-game. And I think my theory on this, or my hypothesis at least, is that this game has built-in mouse acceleration that you just cannot turn off. The reason I say that is because in the traditional Gobstones game, it fucked me over so hard. In Gobstones games in general, all the 3 different variations, mouse acceleration was the only reason that my Gobstone throws were so inconsistent. And it makes no sense why anybody would put that into a game. But for some reason they do it. And for anybody who knows, who's been on my channel for at least some amount of time, you know just how much I hate mouse acceleration in general, especially in games. It is the dumbest thing ever. So, I'm not going to go on a rant in this review about that. That's for another time. But the mouse acceleration was definitely present in this game, and I think that may have been what messed me up with my mouse gestures and made the whole thing feel a lot jankier than it needed to be. The spellcasting kind of fell short, though. Beyond all of the mechanical stuff, it still fell short in the dueling. This is the second game, I believe, to feature actual dueling, wizard on wizard combat, where it's not just you and a boss, it's you and other students. And the second game had it in a closed environment. I could be totally remembering this wrong, and we had dueling in another game as well. But I only remember dueling in the second game and this one. In the second game, it was in a closed room, in a controlled environment, and you couldn't pass a certain line. And it was only you against one other person. In this game, you could engage in dueling whenever you wanted to. You find a Slytherin and you cast a spell at them. You start a duel. I never did that because the first 3 times where I engaged in dueling, I did not enjoy how it felt at all, because it reminded me too much of the spell spamming that I ended up doing in Goblet of Fire, and it took the fun out of it. It felt like there was a lot less strategy to the actual fighting, even though it was far more strategic than in the 4th game, because you had all your different spells to try and knock somebody down. You had your Protego spell to protect yourself from incoming spells, and you had your finishing blow Expelliarmus, you know, the remove the wand from the opponent's hand thing. Every single time there was a duel that happened, there would be so much going on that I felt like I literally had to keep casting Protego just so I didn't keep getting stun locked. And it is a wizard duel. There's lots of wizards there's lots of wizards in the duel, so of course it's going to be more chaotic. But it just felt weird. It felt off. It didn't feel fluid. It didn't feel like it was well designed. It didn't feel... I say that well designed part, you know, trying to swallow my own tongue at the same time, because I can see where they were going with it, but it just didn't feel good to me. And that's part of the reason I stopped using the controller, because trying to cast spells with the controller in those dueling environments was a no-go. It was way too slow to cast anything. And on top of that, the auto-aim also made it really hard. In this game, it still peeves me that you had zero direct control over the camera. The most you could hope to do was to force the camera around by moving your character, or by hoping that the game would focus the camera based on where your auto-aim was. Sometimes it did that, sometimes it didn't. It was a little inconsistent. And it seemed like it was more consistent when you were in combat when you used the controller versus when you used mouse and keyboard. Mouse and keyboard, I noticed it was really inconsistent with that. And I think that's something that it still irked me in this game, was the camera still irked me. Not nearly as bad with that. I don't know why they decided to go with a fixed camera in Resident Evil, right? The Resident Evil-esque fixed camera that they had in Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire. That was just absolutely stupid design decision. They did a much more cinematic floating camera in this game, where it's following Harry and it's following whoever you're playing. I'm glad they didn't do what they did in the last game, but I still felt like I was fighting the camera quite a bit in this one, as well as the auto-aim. The auto-aim itself, I really didn't like the auto-aim, and for good reason. I had a really hard time switching back and forth between targets on the auto-aim. Now, if I had a fixed third-person camera, I could probably do that. But because they decided to go with the camera design choice that they did, this game was a lot harder than it needed to be. It made a lot of things challenging. Every single professor challenge that I had was made far more difficult because of the fact that the camera could not be directly controlled, and I had to either move Harry around or use the auto-aim and try to hope to goodness that it would switch to whatever thing I needed to focus on in time before, whatever timer ran out. The auto-aim was not well thought out, and the camera was not compatible with the design of the auto-aim that they did. Just straight up. The auto-aim and the camera were really bad. I won't say really bad. They were poor. They were not well designed. Still way better than the fourth game. I'm probably going to say that a few more times in this review, huh? Oh well. Now, with the story, it's kind of interesting how they did it in this one. Because, thinking back on it, they cover most of the major plot points, and a lot of the game outside of those cutscenes that they do, it was very Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire-esque, where it's this 20-second cutscene, if that, of some story element being shared. There were a couple exceptions, but most of the cutscenes were fairly short. And a lot of the game outside of that was spent on exploring. But this game intertwined the exploration and the story much better than the previous game did. You knew most of the main characters and what was going on in the story. You heard what was going on through a lot of the other NPCs that you could run into around the castle, as well as dialogue with professors, with Harry, Ron and Hermione, with Fred and George, etc. Everything that happened in the story you could feel it reverberate throughout the game world. And it really helped to keep a sense of time and place within the story plot. And on top of that, a lot of the missions, the main tasks that you did in-game, typically reflected what time period of the story you were in. Like with Umbridge coming to power. I don't remember, was it before or was it after? No, it was before Dumbledore, right? When Umbridge gained more power at Hogwarts and began making all those decrees, you started assembling Dumbledore's army. That was your objective, was rounding everybody up. After Umbridge became headmaster, you had those various tasks of sabotaging her with Fred and George's portable swamps, with the Parvati's, what was that called? Babbling something or other? Babbling juice or babbling potion that you poured on the loudspeakers to make all the weirdness come through. Yeah, all the things that you did in game reflected where you were in the story. And then after all that was said and done, then you could explore to your heart's content on what the game would allow you to. And after Umbridge became headmaster, that was pretty much everything. I don't think there were maybe one or two things where you couldn't explore while you were still in the story, while you were still playing through the story of the game. And as far as pacing is concerned, for the most part, the game felt like it was fairly well paced. Fairly well. With the big exception being near the end, where I think it's around the last quarter or so of both the book and the movie, where you have Harry and other members of Dumbledore's army going into the Ministry of Magic and trying to, number one, save Sirius Black, that Harry saw in a vision being tortured by Voldemort, and then number two, trying to find whatever weapon the Death Eaters are looking for. And 80% of that was all cutscene, where you have Harry, he's in his bed, has the vision of everything going on with Sirius. Then you have this really short sequence, for some reason, I don't know why they didn't just put this in a cutscene too, of you leaving the dorm room, going out into the Hogwarts corridors at night, and going to Dumbledore's office, where you meet McGonagall and do things. Where it throws you into another cutscene. And I don't know why they had you do that in the first place. Because you're just walking through Hogwarts at night, and there's nothing else you can do during that time period. There's nothing else to do. It defeats the whole point of being able to... I guess it's supposed to give you a feel that you have more control, or that you have more... Uancy, something Uancy. It's not influency, it's something else. And I can't remember what it is. Whatever. My vocabulary is not on point today, and that's fine. But 90%, 80% of that last portion of the game story was all cutscenes. And then both of the sequences we had after that were duels, which again, I don't think is this game's strong suit. for the reasons that I mentioned. Number one, the auto-aim. Number two, just spellcasting, camera, and chaos. Now, I do have to say it's not as bad in the last portion of the game, because of the fact that we're typically focusing on one person. We're not casting spells at everybody, and there aren't a bunch of spells flying at us. It's just us and one other person. What was weird about it, though, something else this game did weird was giving you control over different characters aside from Harry. And I'm not talking about like in the fourth game where you could choose whichever of the three you were playing as, Ron, Harry, or Hermione. It just randomly threw you or rested or took your control and put it onto somebody else, a completely different character, where it's like you never would have played them anywhere else in the game. I think the very first instance was Fred and George when they're doing their whole fireworks display during the Owls, which was literally just flying around on a broom and casting spells and trying to hit boxes that they have. I don't even think you had much control over the brooms. It was just casting spells, which is kind of like, eh. And then the other two parts were during that last portion of the game's story. You take control as Sirius Black, and then you take control as Dumbledore. And in both cases, it felt really forced and gimmicky. Especially with Sirius in my case, because I felt like all I could cast that entire time was Protego. I could not cast any other spells. I tried many different combinations, and the only thing that kept coming out was Protego, and I had no idea why. I don't know if that was intentional or not, but it felt really strange. And then with Dumbledore's thing, I don't even remember what I did in that one. I just remember it being an absolute spam fest, where it was just casting as many spells as I possibly can at once, and just hoping for the best. And it felt like my casting didn't have much of an influence on how it actually went anyway, because these crazy spell combinations were showing up out of nowhere. You know, because number one, we're the two most powerful wizards in the world. It's Voldemort and Dumbledore, you know. And just all this weird back and forth stuff that happened. And then cutscene happens, and then suddenly we're back at Hogwarts, and it's the endless day. Just, oh my god, the stupidity of it. So, still definitely needs to work on the pacing, but I look at those sequences, and I have kind of a hard time blaming the developers about any of that. Because it's kind of, what are you supposed to do for the game there? I still think this game suffers from the cutscene trope that was happening in the mid-2000s. Where it felt like every single game had to have lots and lots of cutscenes to tell story. And to tell important events that happen in the book. Sometimes for benefit, sometimes to detriment. So, yeah. I feel like they could have done more with the ending of the game storyline, but then again, they may have just run out of time. Because it's definitely clear that they put a lot more work into this game, but it still felt rushed in certain places. I.e., the Gobstone game, the mouse acceleration. The design on a lot of that stuff just felt clunky, it felt really didn't feel good. Speaking of Gobstones, I do want to touch on the minigames because I have mixed feelings about those. Aside from Exploding Snap. Exploding Snap was really simple and honestly kind of fun in a really weird, simplistic, repetitious kind of way, where it's like I could go back and just play that mindlessly almost, and just do that to pass the time. Only problem is I'd have to launch the game, and I don't feel like doing that. With Wizarding Chess, it was alright. We're not going to talk about the whole thing where I didn't know one of the rules of chess. On its own, the game felt alright. The design of it felt alright. I felt like the AIs were actually really good stepping stones for difficulty. Gryffindor Chess Champion was a really good warm-up. Slytherin Champion was decent. You know, had to play around the fact that he was going to try to go for stalemates and all that. And then the Ravenclaw Champion was really a good step up in difficulty, where I felt like I restarted several times because I knew I was going to lose, or it was going to end in another stalemate. You know, it was not easy getting that final victory with the Ravenclaw Champion. Not difficult, well, not hard, but definitely challenging. But the problem with the Wizarding Chess is everything felt really slow. For me, that's not such a big deal for the most part because I'm bad at chess. So as any of you who saw the live footage saw, I was thinking out loud with what would be a good decision and having to think through every move that I did and playing that out. And I still had a really hard time ending, and I still had a really hard time seeing certain moves. But after you've gotten the first 2 or 3 stalemates, you just want to play the game, man, and you just want to win. And those animations on the chess pieces were so slow. Like the movement, the attacking animation, the moving back, the taking of the space, and then turning back the direction they faced. Like, really, do you have to do that? But still decent. Gobstones is kind of the iffy area, because I actually enjoyed both the Snake Pit and the Jack Gobstone variants. Mostly because of the fact that mouse acceleration was not such a huge deal there. It was trying to get to the middle of... trying to get my Gobstones as close to the edge of the Snake Pit or as close to the Jack Gobstone as possible. But I could do that by knocking the NPC's Gobstones away. And all that requires is aiming and making sure my Gobstone is going fast enough so that it's either knocking their Gobstone away or knocking it into the pit or whatever the hell else. When it required precision with how hard I was throwing my Gobstone, it really sucked. And that was super evident in the traditional Gobstones game. And that's really where I felt like it was rushed. And the fact that I had to play every single variant of the Gobstones games 3 times each in order to play the Gobstone Champion, who I then had to play each variant with again to claim my crown as the Hogwarts Champion of Gobstones. Hell to the no. I'm not doing that. I'm not playing traditional Gobstones 4 times, let alone successfully, so I can be the crown jewel of Gobstones at Hogwarts. Just not doing that, man. Not doing that. But anyway, I think that's enough of a rant on the minigames. The minigames definitely needed a lot of polish. They were still decent, but needed a lot of polish. Even with the okay from J.K. Rowling, because apparently that was a thing. I think... Is there anything else to talk about with this game? I know there's a bunch of little details I could go into and niggle at it, but I really feel like I've covered the main points. And I think that says a lot, because I covered this is about maybe an hour or so of a review. And a lot of this review I actually had praise for the game. That's a first since I started doing these reviews. I didn't have a review for Sorcerer's Stone or Chamber of Secrets, and I know it's called Philosopher's Stone in Europe, but for some reason, I don't know why. I don't know why the Philosopher's Stone had to be changed to Sorcerer's Stone when it came over here, but weirdness. But I didn't do a review for those two games. I probably won't in future, at least not for the PC versions. But I do plan on doing the console versions of the first three games, and more than likely going to be doing reviews for those. So in those cases, I'm more than likely going to do comparisons of the PC version and the console version. So look forward to those. I guess that's the end of this review, because I'm talking about other games now, what I'm planning to do in future. So I do plan on doing the console versions of the first three games, and I do plan on finishing the PC versions. I mean, beyond this point, it's all cross-platform anyway, of Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince and Part 1 and Part 2 of the Deathly Hallows. I do plan on finishing out this series. And once that's done, then I will more than likely hop back in time and do the console versions of the first three games. Or maybe I'll change up the order and see how it goes. I don't know. But yeah, so that's the plan for now. And weirdly enough, we are already halfway through this. This is over the halfway point of the series. That's kind of scary to think about. It's been a crazy one. But this was such a refresher from the last game. Such a refreshing change. I would recommend this game, especially if you're a completionist and just like playing collectathons. For me personally, I still enjoyed it despite that, but I do feel like they could have made some more changes to make it even better than it was. I hear mixed things about the next game, so we'll see what that comes up with, but until then. So thank you all for listening to my ramble review on this game. And if there's anything I left out, feel free to talk about it in the comments. And if you like this Let's Play and got this far, please thumbs up the video. If you're watching this far and you haven't subscribed yet, why? Hit the subscription button. I don't know about the whole bell notification thing. I personally don't use it, but if you want to stay notified, I guess press it. I don't know. Apparently it's as broken as the subscription button is now, so what's the point? And yeah. So, once again, thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Until then, take care, and have a good day. Bye for now.